Again, it's great to be with you. To begin, in Alberta, where I live, the government recognizes Good Samaritan acts. That is, acts that are performed in a true emergency situation where bystanders provide reasonable care to people injured or ill. For those not familiar with my organization, we take on the name Samaritan's Purse in the ethos borrowed from this ancient story about a character simply called the Good Samaritan. So what's a Samaritan? To add color to the main character, the Samaritan from the story was a man considered to be on the lowest rung of the ethnic groups of that time. So as the story's told, there was a man beaten and left for dead on the side of a path, a victim of a violent robbery. Several people of prominence and of wealth saw the victim and simply couldn't be bothered, and they walked around and avoided the victim. The Samaritan was the only person who expressed compassion for the victim. He couldn't leave him alone to die. So he picked him up, brought him to safety. He used his own resources to assist him, even though he was a stranger. In a sense, this stranger became a loved brother to him. So over the years, a character displayed through these acts earned that title, the Good Samaritan. And I think that's still a phrase that we use in our culture today. And I bring up this slide because it's sort of our standard slide, but I like this question. Perhaps the world needs more Good Samaritans. So I thought I'd take a moment to share that with you. Samaritan's Purse is a faith-based organization, a Christian organization that pursues the humanitarian imperative to save lives, alleviate suffering, and to maintain human dignity during and in the aftermath of a crisis. So today, I'll be presenting on WASH in emergencies, particularly from the Samaritan's Purse experience. And I'm trusting that this overview will address the essentials of WASH in emergencies for you. I've condensed a lot, this is a little disclaimer, condensed a lot of content. Essentially, my presentation will be an overview of about 5 to 7 days of training, but I'm trusting it'll be engaging rather than overwhelming. So here's our journey today. I'll provide an overview of WASH in emergencies, provide examples of rapid onset and slow onset disasters. We'll look into WASH in emergency field hospitals settings and WASH and infectious diseases. As well, quickly touch on what it's like to be deployed with Samaritan's Purse, just in case anybody's interested. And we'll have a time of Q&A. And as Cateno had mentioned, if a question does pop up, I'd be happy to field it during my presentation as best as I can. All right. So let me set up a quick video clip for you. I'm going to show a video from a disaster that occurred almost 10 years ago to this day, on 2013. 2013 was a time when November the 8th, Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest recorded storm in history to that point, pounded the eastern provinces of the Philippines. As you watch it, I'd like you to imagine two things: what it would be like to be a victim of such a disaster, and the other thing is what it would be like to provide WASH assistance in this context.
It was so scary. I can't even think about anything, just tremble and nothing else.
I'm thinking that's the end of the world. I just pray that it will be not a painful death.
It was a test of faith.
I feel like crying. I pray to God that others can help us in building our new homes.
By Sunday, we had people here on the ground, and that was right after the storm had passed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Mayor, what has happened to your city.
Yeah, that's terrible.
We are here to care for the people.
Yeah.
Samaritan sports coming in. It's really big impact on the people.
We're focusing on medical. We have a team of doctors here.
Water's coming in. Shelters are coming in.
And then the other thing that we're focusing on is food. And we've been working with partner churches.
I'm very, very thankful to you, to all of you, because your rice reached our place.
We see hope. Even after this typhoon, we still see hope.
The pastors have already stepped up to the plate. They're actually the ones that are helping offload right now. It's amazing to see the body of Christ come together for this.
We believe that God will rebuild the Philippines. We believe that.
So it's not an easy thing to respond to an emergency or to be part of the recovery and rebuilding process. It certainly takes effort, cooperation, coordination, and resources to build back better. We spent a lot of time over the next 5 years in that particular setting, working in the communities, and thankfully the communities were well on the path to recovery when we moved on. Depending on the resilience baseline of any community, particularly in low-income communities, it often takes a longer time to recover. And we assisted in all areas of WASH, and for recovery, we focused on sanitation programming and building back better of schools and the provision of improved water facilities, including filtration systems in over 45 schools. So to our focus today, what is an emergency or disaster? And a good working definition is seen here. It's a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society involving widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impacts, which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. And as Samaritan's Purse responds, we respond through a mechanism, our disaster assistance response team. And we also respond through the efforts of our field offices or local partners. And the picture you see here is our team setting up chlorinated water distribution tanks at an Ebola treatment center. This was taken in 2018 in the DRC. Again, moving forward, the types of disasters. Okay, disasters are classified as either natural or man-made. As well, they can be classified as either rapid or slow onset, depending on the pace by which it makes an impact. In the case of the typhoon, early warning systems projected that a devastating storm was approaching, and evacuation orders were given, particularly for the coastal areas. But since 18 to 24 major storms hit the Philippines each year, many of the people in those communities that were impacted chose to shelter in place rather than evacuate from the coastlines. Unfortunately, no one could have anticipated the strength of this storm and the devastating storm surge that developed. And as you could see in this picture, the immense surge lasted for several hours and even lifted up 100-foot vessels over 500 meters away from the shoreline. We would consider this a rapid onset natural disaster. Let me give you another example. And I did borrow this picture. I couldn't find one from my archives. However, it's taken from South Sudan at the refugee camp called Ida. On July 9th, 2011, South Sudan became the newest country in the world. However, prior to and afterwards, conflicts between Sudan and South Sudan occurred. This created a slow onset man-made disaster situation where many targeted ethnic and religious groups had to flee from the southern regions of Sudan to find some relative safety within the northern borders of South Sudan. Again, painting the picture, the South Sudan government designated Ida as a place to accommodate refugees around by sort of mid or fall 2011. By the end of 2011, there were about 10,000 people finding refuge in Ida, and Samaritan's Purse began operations the fall of 2011. My colleague and I were tasked to provide WASH programming and to develop 12 water points, boreholes, and distribution points. We arrived the first week of April, and about 25,000 people resided in Ida. By the end of April, 55,000 people were finding refuge there. So a quick mental calculation. If we target between 7.5 to 15 liters per day per person at the start of April, what additional range of water production would be necessary to address the population surge of 30,000 people? Yes, anyone in that situation would be very busy. The next slide. Samaritan's Purse has responded to over 130 major disaster responses since 1992, and many of our responses had a wash component. And I know you're skimming through this timeline right now. Some of our more notable responses are illustrated here, and perhaps you can recall your own personal reactions to some of these major disasters around the world. So I'll just pause there for a second for you to become familiar. So it's fairly up to date, up to 2023 during the Turkey earthquakes. So let me provide a snapshot of our mobilization process. So imagine with me that a disaster event occurs somewhere in the world. Our organization conducts an initial rapid assessment that's remote, and when thresholds are met, we stand up an incident management team, an IMIT, to give oversight of the entirety of our response operations. Part of the IMIT's task is to further assess the disaster, engage local governments, and to deploy personnel and assets. We have capacity to address needs in all key sectors from food, nutrition, shelter, health, and wash. And our leadership has prioritized that we be fast and good. There we go. So the small inset is that of a project triangle. Some of you might be familiar with it. Each apex is an ideal goal to achieve, either fast, cheap, or good. However, in practice, what is achievable is typically just two. If you pursue fast and cheap, there's a potential to be substandard in your interventions. If you pursue good and cheap, it will often be a slow intervention. Deciding on fast and good comes with the reality that it will be expensive. So one of our standards, if we deploy, is to never come to the victims empty-handed. And over the years, we have procured key assets, capacities. For example, we have warehouse supplies and our own fleet of planes able to be on the ground between 24 to 48 hours after an incident. And we regularly conduct Samaritan's Purse Dart wash training and have nearly 80 wash trained personnel on our roster. And we can call up our permanent wash staff as well at any point. Of those numbers, we are approaching 30 Canadians, and a few of you I noticed are online. So good to see everyone. Maybe I can convince a few of the others to perhaps consider joining the Canadian content. So Samaritan's Purse interventions are according to international standards, but not limited by those minimal standards. And I wanted to touch on this humanitarian charter and the minimum standards in humanitarian responses via the SPHERE standards. So the SPHERE standards were developed by international humanitarian aid agencies through a collaborative process. All key sectors are presented in the SPHERE standards. Food, nutrition, shelter, health, wash, all have minimum standards. So let me take you quickly through some of the content. So the SPHERE standards for wash can be seen in this table of wash standards per area of responsibility. So there's hygiene, water, excreta management, vector control, solid waste, disease outbreak, and healthcare setting standards. Essentially, this is the breadth of wash responsibilities during an emergency. So let's quickly focus on the water supply standard, which is 2.1. So water access and water quantity standards. The upcoming table inset, which I'll show you now, zooms into the water quantity standards that we should pursue. So here are the target ranges. Water intake, it accounts for water intake needs, for consumption, I mean. It accounts for hygiene needs, cooking, and it provides ranges of water quantity that's recommended. Again, the minimum standards. However, what I want you to take from this is that it's good to have these minimum standards, but if you could provide 50 liters of water per day, go for it. Of quick note is standard 2.2, dealing with water quality minimum parameters. We factor this in as well in all of our interventions by ensuring that our interventions meet quality standards that we maintain. And we also maintain these standards through regular water quality testing. So let me take you through this graph. The y-axis is technical quality. The x-axis is time, similar to that triangle that I shared with you. Essentially, this informs our efforts and our priorities. I wanted you to also take in the concept of DART waves, or just response waves. You could see waves 1, 2, and 3. Each DART wave has a priority goal. Wave 1, the priority goal is life-saving interventions. Wave 2 and 3, yes, we still pursue life-saving interventions, but we begin to position ourselves towards recovery. Of note, in recovery mode, we may initiate Build Back Better designs in our interventions. If ongoing need and opportunity align, we continue to serve the affected communities by establishing a field office to further do recovery programming. With regards to WASH during wave 1, these are the typical interventions. And just a quick acronym, FS4, SS 1.5, those stand for our Fresh Spring 4 and our Sea Spring 1.5 units. These are modular water treatment units we've designed. And in a couple slides from now, we'll look at it in a bit more detail. So typical in the first wave, when life-saving interventions are the priority, depending on what's available, we do water trucking to bring in safe water. We chlorinate existing but compromised water systems. Depending on the situation, trench latrines are common in a rapid onset situation. The goal for that is to deter disease spread. WASH NFIs are often distributed, that is non-food items like jerry cans, point of use water treatment units like soy filters or pure packs are common. WashM, and a few of you might be part of the efforts of WashM. We've continued to explore this too. So this is a rapid hygiene assessment tool intended for designing our interventions. So here's a picture from 2021, not too long ago, our Haiti earthquake response and the deployment of one of our units, our Fresh Springs 4 unit. Again, we have a designated group of personnel who are part of our emergency water response team. And this team has designed modular units specific to our target water production needs. It has capacity for fresh water and salt or brackish water processing. Our DART WASH team members are thoroughly trained to handle these units when we deploy them. They're designed to fit on pallets. I believe it's 4 pallets. All the equipment for Fresh Spring units can be placed on. And you might have seen that picture of one of our planes. So we put the pallets on something called a cookie sheet, and we're able to quickly deploy it in country. I suspect for some of you here, you'd be interested in some of the technical details. And up is a very messy slide, all right? So here's a messy, busy slide. When it comes to large-scale emergency water production, the elements of it are accessing the water source. And typically, we access existing water source through submersible pump controllers, and we need to power them up with a generator. From the source, we go to our water production unit. And at the very center is our Fresh Springs unit that you saw in the Haiti picture. And also our Sea Springs unit, which is essentially a reverse osmosis unit. Our Fresh Springs unit incorporates alum dosing, bag and membrane filtration, along with UV and chlorination. Once water goes to our production units, we need to store them. So water is produced, it's stored, and these are just examples of the types of storage that we use. You can see the blue water bladder that's on an elevated stand to the left, and you can see a water bladder, which is about 15,000 liters on the ground. That's common. So the next thing that we do is we need to distribute the water, and we just typically distribute the water. If there's power available, we distribute via pump to tap stands, and the tap stand you can see at the bottom. We want it to be as easy as possible for the end users to access water and to not wait so long in the queue. The last little element of this slide are the consumables. And so our standard is to have a minimum of 1 month supply of consumables like chlorine or alum and extra membranes at all times when we deploy. All right. So our recent deployments, there we go. Our recent deployments have been in Haiti, Ukraine, Puerto Rico, Turkey, and we hope to find ways to deploy our units here in Canada as well. For example, the fires in Alberta this year, we worked with affected communities, and a lot of their water treatment facilities were compromised or even destroyed. And so temporary access to safe water through perhaps the units that we offer would have been invaluable, but there's a few hoops to jump through first here in Canada. So again, sanitation is a crucial aspect in emergencies, and essentially what we're trying to do is minimize fecal oral disease transmission, and that's our WASH responsibility. Many of you would be familiar with the F diagram and the creation of transmission barriers through toilets, through safe water, through hygiene. The sanitation ladder, again, is the gradient of levels of sanitation. Based on our assessment, our goal is to move as much as possible towards safely managed systems. And our DART WASH team are all adept at these concepts, and they pass it on to local staff to pursue these goals. And one sphere standard that I want to highlight is that at the onset, we want to be able to provide 1 toilet per 20 people. Ideally, we'll move towards 1 toilet per household, depending on the situation. Let me grab a sip of water. And let's see if that recharges me. All right. So sanitation in emergencies. I'm hoping everyone's doing well. Access to sanitation is essential for the health of the affected communities. At the onset, we pursue the sphere standards, as I mentioned, 1 to 20, 1 latrine per 20 people. We want to design to preserve dignity, to be culturally appropriate, and we always want to factor accessibility to vulnerable communities and consider security as well. Picture, thanks to WEDIC, is just something, if you're not familiar, a communal trench latrine. Eventually, we want to establish, again, as I mentioned, something of better quality and a design for community latrines. But you could note there's a light and charging station for phones. That might be luxurious, the charging station, but a light in the darkness brings a lot of security for women, children who need to access a toilet at night. So something to factor if you're ever in that situation. So as we conduct aspects of hygiene interventions, something that we always consider are personal, environmental aspects of hygiene, such as home and waste management, food and water related hygiene standards, for example, food prep, safe storage, and menstrual hygiene management. Those are a few things that as WASH personnel, we should provide to our best of ability. And as you could see, this is our standard hygiene kit that we inventory, and they're ready to go. And you could just skim through the list. Over time, working with a WASH cluster, and if you're not familiar, the WASH cluster is an interagency working group hosted by UNICEF during a disaster. Typically, a WASH cluster will recommend a localized hygiene kit based on that context. But this is the standard one that we have ready to go. So hygiene in emergencies. If I could say one thing, hand washing with soap in an emergency is essential. And thanks to great people from COS, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and Action Contre la Femme, they developed a tool which we're continuing to explore. Um, and so it's the washem tool. Washem is a rapid assessment tool designed to inform the development of a context-based hygiene strategy by providing recommendations to program design. So back to the Philippines, we found it advantageous to couple hygiene education wherever we conducted distributions of any training. Our goal was to encourage high hygiene standards, especially in a vulnerable time of recovery. And so, as I mentioned, hygiene essential includes hand washing with soap. You can see from the collage of pictures there, our hygiene educators in action. The top left picture shows them doing a presentation amidst a distribution on a drizzly day. Next little picture. All right. I'm watching your faces. A couple of you are leaning in. Yes, that is Mr. Feces. If I could share another thing, do not shy away from being creative. We need to get the message out why improved hygiene standards are essential after an emergency. And I love the team in the Philippines. If you ever get a chance to visit the Philippines, it's a very, uh, uh, let's just say, entertainment-driven culture. And so what gravitated to the communities that we were serving then was formed dramas, music, things like that. And that really is essential. So please be creative if you're able to manage, if one day you manage hygiene promotion in emergencies. All right, so I wanted to point this out. Again, back to the table from Sphere. Wash in disease situations. And I'm cognizant of time. I have a few more minutes to present. So wash in disease outbreaks and healthcare settings. So Samaritan's Purse has invested considerable effort to provide medical services during emergencies and to fulfill the humanitarian imperative, as I said, of saving lives and reducing suffering. And so we have developed the capacity to deploy medical personnel, field hospitals, and medical assets around the world. And so the next little picture is one of our deployments in 2019 in the Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian. Just take a moment to think of the WASH considerations when running a field hospital such as this. In my humble opinion, I would say next to the medical services, WASH is essential in a situation like this. And water supply is essential for all the medical services, for patient use, for staff use, their housing. We're responsible for sanitation services, disinfection of the facilities, maintenance and cleanup, disease control, waste management. All of that fits within the WASH responsibility. Moving ahead, just this year, as I mentioned, we saw that timeline of our efforts in, and I tried pronouncing this, Antakya, Turkey. I was not deployed here. We were able to deploy a 52-bed hospital. And I wanted to give a snapshot of that process. So the earthquake occurred February the 6th. A letter of capacity was sent to the government of Turkey. From there, the Ministry of Health sent a letter of invitation to Samaritan's Purse. So we told them we had the capacity to bring in a hospital, one of our emergency field hospitals. We activated our logistics and our air assets. And on a Friday, February 11th, we landed in Turkey. That's the evening. And that night, we trucked all of our assets to site. By early morning, Monday, the site was fully operational, thanks to all the work of the logistics, the WASH staff, and even the medical staff were used to set up this hospital. In this particular case, it's adjacent to a 1,000-bed hospital that was deemed unsafe because of the earthquake. All right. So again, the wash for this hospital operation uh, included ongoing services, included the setup of the wash infrastructure. It included the hiring of local staff and the training of the local staff. And we originally designed the hospital or planned to operate the hospital for 2 months. I think it stayed much longer than that. Sorry, the number of days eludes me. So a few more slides, we're almost there. And let me show you this video coming up. Some of you might remember this event.
The Ebola outbreak is still continuing.
This invisible disease is lurking all over.
Ebola is a deadly virus, and there's about a 70 to 90% case fatality rate.
One drop of human body fluid contains between 500,000 and 1 million strings of the virus. It takes 10 strings of the virus to infect you.
We are up against a really, really big challenge.
There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of frustration.
In real life, it's very different than what you see on television. It's people, it's your neighbors.
The fight against infectious diseases has to occur. And if we just sit back and do nothing, then the fight will come to us.
We come back because we care, and we come back because we have a calling. This is who we are as Christians.
This is such a terrifying and traumatizing time for Liberian people, and we can't neglect to give them hope.
30, 20. 10.
All right. We do our best to learn from our past responses. And some of you might recall way back then in 2014, the experience of Ebola. And from our experiences in Ebola, we were poised to respond in 2018 to another outbreak in the DRC. This is an aerial of our Ebola treatment center from 2018. And also, this is a more recent layout plan for an Ebola treatment center that was developed subsequent to 2018. And so we're prepped for a future Ebola response if called upon. Again, it's iterative. We haven't perfected our programming, our capacities, our systems yet. But if you think about, I mean, we've all just went through the season of COVID. And I'm thankful that things have improved a lot. And so infectious disease outbreaks is certainly something that's a WASH responsibility, especially in an emergency response. And it's not an easy thing. And let me just go through a quick few details. Again, it's very challenging in an Ebola context because there are higher protocols and standards for WASH activities when addressing such outbreaks. Understandably, mitigation of risks to all personnel compounds the challenge. So again, quickly touching what it's like to conduct emergency WASH in the setting, we have to manage the water supply, and water is essential, especially chlorinated waters. So we manage a 0.5% solution of chlorine because that's important for disinfection protocol. Solid waste management and cleanup is part of our responsibility in an Ebola treatment center. We set up and manage incinerators for essentially all wastes. We train team members to maintain wards and clean up after patients. Site drainage, we certainly wouldn't want overland flooding to devastate our Ebola treatment center in a place like the DRC. In this case, a local government designated an area, and we had to work with that. And the slope wasn't ideal, but I believe there's a couple of people that were part of setting up that on this call, and they could jump into it. So they did a great job in creating gradients and berms to manage the drainage. For sanitation, the viral load is highest in the feces and in the deceased. So we train and manage teams to clean bedpans, manage pit latrines. We were in a rural, isolated conflict zone area, so there were no sanitation services, and pit latrines were limed for disinfection. again, our responsibility is to thoroughly train local staff. And so, especially with a safety protocol. And the bottom picture is that of our donning and doffing process. So that's the donning process where we put on the PPE, the personal protective equipment. The system requires rigid protocol, as you could imagine, and all aspects of donning are verified by the staff designated in that station. And it's a laborious process. In hot climates, you don't want to be wearing PPE for more than 45 minutes. And so you go to the doffing process. That's the removal of the PPE. As the WASH team members, again, it's our responsibility. And my advice is that in a disease and an outbreak situation, if you do donning and doffing, get staff who are strict, get staff who take no shortcuts whatsoever. The other pictures are that of our laundry station. We have things called low risk or zones or high risk hot zones. That's something that everyone must be aware of. Finally, I'll just touch on the mortuary. Part of the WASH responsibility is the management of the deceased. In many contexts, the grieving process without safety protocol is a high risk situation. And so what you have to do is find out what's appropriate and what you could compromise in. And so in Liberia, we adapted by ordering body bags that had transparent membranes that could be uncovered. This allowed loved ones to see the faces of their deceased members, and but also they could observe. They had to observe beyond a protective barrier, and that was really important. And typically, funerals, there's internment of bodies in Liberia, but we had to cremate at that time. All right, I'm almost done. So a couple more slides. So this is my last slide. And it's just a screenshot from our website. And there's quite a few of you on board now in this presentation. And this, trust me, this isn't a recruitment thing. But if anybody is curious and wants to find out more, feel free to look at our website, SamaritansPurse.ca. Yes, some of you might be interested or be compelled to be part of DART, emergency WASH. And certainly, if you get a hold of me, I'll make myself available. I could talk to you more about that, not just with Samaritan's Purse, but with other opportunities you might want to pursue. So as a starting point, yeah, check out our website. Again, briefly, we cover all costs for transport and travel all costs for our first phase of training. That's food and accommodation, not transport. I have to correct myself. But when deployed, folks that go with us, we cover all costs for transport, accommodation, food, and we provide a stipend. And for subsequent training, like our emergency WASH training or our DART WASH training, typically that's in North Carolina or Calgary for about a week. We cover all costs there plus a stipend. Again, to end my presentation, thank you so much for having me. We'll transition to Q&A. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Katano at this time.